For decades, you have been sold a beautiful fairy tale about humanity's dream, the conquest of the stars, and Gagarin's smile. In reality, the first foray into space was merely the final calibration of a system for the total destruction of your cities. Cosmonautics is not science. It is applied ballistics disguised as a triumph of reason. In October 1957, the world stood still upon hearing the famous beep-beep of the first Sputnik. People in the streets wept with joy, believing that the gates to a new era had opened. But in secret bunkers on both sides of the ocean, generals were not looking through telescopes. They were looking at stopwatches. For them, space was never a temple of knowledge. It was a giant, airless proving ground for testing intercontinental missiles. Gagarin flew not because the Kremlin wanted to study the moon, but because his rocket was perfectly suited for delivering a multi-ton thermonuclear warhead to another continent. All of your peaceful space is merely the glittering dust kicked up by the hooves of the horsemen of the apocalypse. We have grown accustomed to regarding astronauts as ambassadors of humanity to the infinite, but the truth is, they were the first test pilots of the most sophisticated killing machine ever created on Earth. The legendary R-7, which carried the first man into orbit and became the symbol of Soviet triumph, was not originally designed for the stars. It was created as an absolute sledgehammer, capable of wiping Washington off the face of the Earth in 30 minutes. Sergei Korolev was a great dreamer, but his budgets were signed by men who didn't care about Martian apple trees. They needed a rocket capable of delivering a monstrous 5-ton hydrogen bomb over a distance of 10,000 kilometers. At the time, this seemed impossible, and space became the ideal laboratory. To avoid frightening the planet with daily tests of doomsday weapons, they were packaged in the beautiful wrapping of outer space exploration. Every scientific achievement of Korolev's was first and foremost a report to the Politburo. Comrades, our rocket can now reach anywhere, and the enemy's air defenses won't notice it. The space race was a genius cover story. While the world admired the power of the engines, generals celebrated the emergence of the world's first intercontinental ballistic missile, against which there was no defense. The famous beep-beep signal was not intended for amateur radio enthusiasts across the globe. That sound was history's first spotlight on the wall of a global shooting range. Sputnik was not an instrument, but a beacon used to calibrate the accuracy of falling atomic bombs. Why did the first satellite only need a radio? Why weren't cameras or pressure sensors installed? The answer is cynical. Sputnik served as a test target in the sky. In order for a rocket to accurately hit New York or London, engineers needed to understand how radio waves pass through the ionosphere and how they could be used to track flight trajectories at extreme speeds. Every beep provided ground stations with coordinates, allowing them to calculate the margin of error. The world listened to that sound with delight, unaware that they were actually listening to the operation of a telemetry system, learning to guide nuclear warheads through outer space. Sputnik proved the main point. Space is the ideal corridor through which death can be thrown with impunity to any point on the planet, and this beacon confirmed that the target was locked. Yuri Gagarin was not sent into orbit for the sake of the human spirit's feat. He was stuffed into the cramped Vostok capsule to test whether a biological organism could survive inside a ballistic projectile and, more importantly, remain functional enough to operate a nuclear installation. Gagarin's flight was the final crash test of life support systems for military needs. For the generals in Moscow and Washington, a human in space was a black box of blood and bone. They needed the answer to one question. Would the operator go insane from weightlessness and G-forces at the moment they had to press the launch button on an orbital platform? Gagarin was a hero, but to the system, he was a biosensor in a complex war machine. His 108 minutes of triumph confirmed that the biological layer between the rocket and the target was viable. This meant that now, not only automation, but full combat crews could be deployed into space. When we celebrate April 12th, we celebrate the day the rocket for the destruction of civilization officially received manned status. The Americans rushed to the moon not for a flag or for science. It was the most expensive and ambitious demonstration of force in history. They wanted to prove to the entire world that their rockets were capable of hitting a dime at a distance of 380,000 kilometers. The Apollo program was a grand bluff and, simultaneously, an honest warning. The point was not to collect a bag of rocks, but to demonstrate the perfection of navigation and control systems. If you are capable of calculating a trajectory, putting a module into orbit around another celestial body, landing it there, and, the hardest part, bringing it back, then there are no unreachable targets on Earth for your computer. The Moon served as the perfect testing ground. If an American rocket can enter the lunar horizon with surgical precision, it can fly through a Kremlin window without the slightest effort. It was a mathematical slap in the face to Soviet ambitions. The Moon was not the goal, but a giant target. Whoever marked the X there first de facto announced, "We control all the space from here to your doorstep." Have you ever wondered why, after 1972, humanity suddenly fell out of love with the Moon? We are told it became too expensive, but the truth is different. Interest evaporated the exact moment the military achieved perfect accuracy. By the early 70s, the ballistic problem had been solved. Engineers had learned to hit a target with a warhead within a circle 100 meters in diameter on the other side of the planet. As soon as that happened, space as a proving ground for guidance systems lost its relevance for the generals. Spending billions of dollars on manned flights and the delivery of lunar soil became pointless. The military tasks were complete, and scientific interest was never the real driver of the budget. The giant Saturn V and N1 rockets were sent to the scrap heap of history because they became redundant for nuclear deterrence. Cosmonautics went into hibernation because the sights were calibrated, and the warmongers required nothing more from the stars. We stopped flying to the Moon not because it became unprofitable, but because the Moon was not the target. The target on Earth was locked, and the show could be shut down. Do you think Elon Musk is about the colonization of Mars and free internet for villages? Take off the rose-colored glasses. Modern private space is merely a new stage in the struggle for the right to pull the trigger first, only now under the mask of techno-hype. Why are the Pentagon and governments so actively subsidizing the launch of thousands of Starlink satellites? The answer lies in the word targeting. In modern warfare, it is not enough to simply launch a missile. One must guide thousands of smart drones and projectiles in real time. Giant constellations of small satellites create an invulnerable neural network over the planet. If previously a strike required a massive rocket and long calculations, today Internet from Musk allows any point in the world to be turned into a shooting range. We are seeing the same pattern again. We are sold a convenient service while behind the scenes, the military receives a system that is impossible to shoot down and provides 100% control over the battlefield. A Tesla in space is a great image for the media, but the real reason these rockets launch every week is the creation of a digital leash for the entire planet. While you were admiring photographs of Earth from space, actual warships with automatic cannons on board were flying in orbit. These were not scientific laboratories, but orbital fortresses. In the 70s, the USSR launched a series of Almaz stations under the peaceful name Salyut. Inside sat military intelligence officers, not biologists. The main detail that was kept quiet for decades: a 23mm Noodleman aircraft cannon was installed on the stations. Why? To shoot down enemy interceptor satellites and inspectors. Space had already ceased to be peaceful back then. It had turned into a place where fire was officially open to kill. All the scientific atmosphere was only needed to justify the presence of armed men over the heads of a potential adversary. We believed in the handshake in space, while at the same time, high-speed cannons capable of turning any craft into a sieve were being tested in orbit. Did you think the space shuttle was built for deploying telescopes? Generals in the USSR were convinced of something else. The shuttle is the ideal satellite thief and a diving nuclear bomber. When the Americans launched the space shuttle program, Soviet analysts were horrified. The massive cargo bay and the ability to maneuver in the atmosphere suggested one thing: this ship could dive from space, drop a nuclear charge on Moscow in 4 minutes, and return to orbit. In response, the USSR began developing Buran and the spiral system. All of this pompous, reusable space technology was an attempt to create an elusive Avenger that could strike directly from the stratosphere. Science was only given the shuttles because it was too expensive for the military to maintain them alone. A beautiful shuttle launch at Cape Canaveral was not a step toward the stars, but a rehearsal of an orbital maneuver to bypass all air defense systems. The navigator in your phone that leads you to the nearest coffee shop is a byproduct of a system created so that a nuclear missile could find its target with meter precision. The GPS system and GLONASS is the most widespread example of military space in your pocket. It was created exclusively for the needs of the army, for troop coordination, and above all, for the ultra-precise guidance of ballistic missiles. Before the advent of satellite navigation, strike error margins were hundreds of meters. With GPS, it was reduced to the size of a kitchen table. We were only granted access to this technology when the military realized that civilian use would help hide the true scale of their total control over space. Every time you turn on your maps, you are using a military site that was originally calibrated for the destruction of strategic targets. What environmentalists call the debris problem, the military sees as the perfect way to close off space to an enemy forever. There is the concept of Kessler syndrome, when there is so much debris in orbit that it destroys everything living and mechanical. But in military headquarters, this is viewed as a scorched earth strategy. If one country begins to lose in space, it is to their advantage to blow up a couple of their own satellites to create a cloud of shrapnel that will wipe out the enemy's entire satellite constellation. Space turns into a minefield where a cheap fragment of an old rocket worth a cent can destroy $1 billion craft. We fear the cluttering of the orbit, while the military sees it as the last argument, capable of blinding the entire planet in a single moment. Why is Elon Musk in such a hurry to get to Mars? Not because he is a fan of science fiction, it is simply because Earth has become too vulnerable, and the elites need a backup command post beyond the reach of Earth-based missiles. The colonization of Mars is the final point in the separation of the chosen from the targets, while the accuracy of nuclear warhead strikes is being perfected on Earth. Mars becomes the only place that cannot be reached by existing weapons. This is not about saving humanity, it is about saving those who make the decisions. Space is once again being used as a refuge and a technological lever. If you have a base on Mars, you can dictate terms to the entire planet while remaining safe millions of kilometers away. The romance of the Red Planet is merely an advertising campaign for the construction of the most expensive bunker in the history of the universe.